Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, June 13th, 2025, and our friend Larry Johnson is back with us. Welcome back, Larry.
I wish I would say I was happy to be here. This is not a happy time at all.
Yeah. Larry, what has happened? Here is what Donald Trump tweeted yesterday, and he said that he wants to negotiate. We remain committed to a diplomatic resolution to the Iranian nuclear issue. It seems that as Israeli reported, that the United States helped Israel to make some sort of comfort in Iran that they're trying to do something diplomatically with Iran, while behind the scene they were trying to do everything to facilitate the Israeli attack on Iran. Your
Yeah,
take?
Trump's lying. Donald Trump is a liar. He admitted today that he knew the date and time of the Israeli attack. He knew everything. Then he said, yeah, they've killed a bunch of people that we were talking to. The Iranians better learn their lesson. You know what Iran and Israel has been just as bad. Netanyahu and his government, they're bragging, yeah, we negotiated with some Iranian Air Force leaders. Boy, we tricked them. We got information out of them that they didn't realize we were getting, and we used that to target and kill key leaders. Okay, so this is like a Hollywood script for Israel. This whole decapitation nonsense. If we just kill the upper leadership, the problem's going to go away. Uh, that would be true if it was just a one-person organization. Actually, come to think about it, the decapitation strategy, Jews have been using that now for over 2,000 years. There was this other Jew by the name of Jesus. He got decapitated. They took out the leader there. That killed Christianity off, didn't it? No, it didn't. And that's sort of the foolishness of this strategy. Look at all they killed. Go back to the early days of Hamas. Sheikh Yassin, an old man in a wheelchair. They killed him. Boy, that was going to stop Hamas. New leaders keep rising up because it's not a one-man charismatic organization. It is something organic. Look at all the assassinated Nasrallah again, using the same ploy that apparently they used here, or they used here the same ploy they used against Nasrallah. Nasrallah was meeting at a specific site in Beirut in order to discuss an upcoming ceasefire, to work out a ceasefire, a peace agreement with Israel. And Israel used that as a ploy to kill him. Has Hezbollah gone away? Has Hezbollah been defeated? Israel launched all the pager attacks. Again, they killed a bunch of people, a bunch of people linked to Hezbollah. It has not destroyed that organization. It continues to exist. So this attack on Iran, I think it's troublesome on so many different levels. First, it is an overt act of war. This is no different than the Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor on December 7th. And I'm not going to go into all the back and forth about how Roosevelt knew that was happening and may have allowed it in order to create a December 7th event to get the U.S. into war. But this, I think, if President Pezeshkian wants to stay in power, he has no alternative but to declare war on Israel in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter. And what's interesting is that agreement. Go back and look at the security agreement that Russia and Iran signed on January 17th. While it was not an explicit defense pact at all, the language in the first two or three articles, I don't recall which one specifically, but the precise number, but I do recall that it talks about basically any attack against Iran that was in violation of Article 51 of the UN Charter would be dealt with. It would basically elicit a response, not necessarily militarily, but definitely a response from Russia. And see, here we get into this broader issue that you know 2 weeks ago Trump was bragging about, oh yeah, I talked to Putin, and Putin. We talked a lot about how Russia's going to help us with Iran. Oh, really? What? Uh, Putin made offers to assist, and Trump said, "Oh yeah, we'll do that. We'll work on that together." And then this morning, Trump's bragging, "I knew all along where this attack was going to take place. And we're all in favor of it. And in fact, Iran better come to the table and surrender now, or else there's going to be more like the United States is facilitating this, enabling it." Now, I fully expect that the Russia's counsel to Iran at this point is do not, even though the U.S. is complicit, even though they're responsible, you can exact revenge from them later. Confine your attacks to Israel. Israel's the one that has overtly violated Article 51. Don't give the United States an excuse. And so, if Iran confines its attacks to the targets in Israel, um, we're going to, I think, this is going to escalate. There's no way that this cannot escalate. Yeah, there is one way, and that's if Iran completely collapses, the civilian and Islamic leadership collapses, and they surrender. I don't see that happening. But Iran suffered a very serious blow, and it's now we're going to see who's calling the shots, whether it's the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei or the IRGC. I know they've had several of their top leaders killed, but again, it's a military organization. They've got other generals and other colonels that'll step up and fill those positions. And what may be happening is you'll get somebody who's far more radical and much more oriented towards action than the previous guys.
As we talk, they've been replaced. The commanders of Iranian army, the Iranian IRGC. But Larry, when you look at the United States, even we assume that Donald Trump said to Israel, "Go ahead, go attack Iran," with decapitation, with the level, because he said the outcome is excellent. He wanted just decapitation.
Let me stop you there. He didn't give permission. The United States was engaged in planning with Israel to carry out this strike, okay? It's not permission, it's planning. Military assets were allocated. Intelligence was being shared. Weapons were being supplied. So the United States was not some passive sitting by on the sidelines and, oh, look at that. No. U.S. was directly involved.
Do you think that with the outcome, with what we've seen so far with the Israeli attack, did they achieve what they wanted to achieve?
No, that's the story that's being put out right now. We'll see. It's always with these kinds of strikes. Remember the early days in the first 24 hours, 48 hours when we bombed Iraq back in 2003? Oh, great victory celebration. Hey, a month later, George Bush, mission accomplished. How did that turn out? So Israel can inflict and has inflicted quite a bit of damage, but the extent of which we don't know. They've targeted airfields, they've targeted military sites. I mean, it's impressive the number of attacks they've been able to pull off on this compared to the one on October 27th. The one on October 27th was easily defeated, and maybe it was that defeat that led Israel to step up its planning to figure out how to counter that. And I don't know if Iran was sitting back on its haunches and saying, "Oh, boy, we got this under control," or what. But it certainly in the last 24 hours Iran got its ass handed to it. And if it does not act with force, we're in trouble. And I see our great friend Professor Marandi has showed up alive and well, and I'm thankful for that.
Hi, Larry. Thank you
Welcome,
very
Professor
much.
Randy. Welcome.
Thank you, Nima.
Professor Randy, tell us what's going on in Iran. What has happened and why did the United States decide to go with the plan of Israelis to attack on Iran, maybe the US plan?
Well, first of all, I'd like to apologize, but they've slowed down the internet connection for military purposes. So my connection may not be great. Uh, if there's a problem, let me know. I wish I could hear what Larry has to say because he always has words of wisdom. But the Iranians were expecting an attack. I don't think, this is my personal assessment, that they expected the Israelis to cross all red lines and to attack senior officials. I think the expectation was that they would strike military targets and perhaps the nuclear program, or begin with uh, anti-aircraft systems and radar systems and so on. And that, I think, was an important miscalculation on behalf of the Iranians. And they are regrouping as we speak. The new commanders have been put in place, and they have to begin work. And so my expectation is that the Iranians will respond, and they will respond severely. But there's no doubt that the Israeli regime hurt Iran, and but there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation. A lot of the things that you see online are not true. For example, I read in some of these well-known uh, Telegram channels that a city was bombed, and I actually had a very close friend who lived in that city. It's a small city, and I called him and asked him if he's okay, and he said nothing happened here. Or, for example, some of the footage of that's online about some of these strikes, they're AI, they're not real. Some of them are real, but the point is that there's a heavy amount of psychological warfare now being uh, carried out against Iran, both through the Persian media channels, but also, of course, through Western media, social media. They own the media. They have the upper hand. So there's a lot of rumors, but from people who I know, who I trust, when I get information, they debunk some of those rumors, and they turned out to be correct. And so, for example, I knew about uh, General Bagheri's martyrdom from these people before it was announced. But the very same people, or uh, General Hajizadeh, I heard from them before it was announced. But the same people said that certain airstrikes, certain targets, the news that was coming out was not correct. So these are people I do trust. But it's been a very difficult day. Just 15, 20 minutes ago, there's a sound of explosion. I don't know if the Iranian air defenses hit something or if there was a strike. It's unclear from here, but it's war. But you have to keep in mind, Nima and Larry, that Iran is very much alone. This is NATO supporting this genocidal regime. You've seen the French and the Germans and others all siding with the Israelis, saying they have the right to defend themselves. This was unprovoked. The German statement that someone read to me, Ali Nima read to me, said that Iran was violating the and its regulations in the IAEA, which is not true. Iran is well within its rights, according to international law, to do what it is with its nuclear program as we speak. The body, the board of governors is very much politicized. It's dominated by the West, like other international institutions created post Second World War. And they said that the Iranians have fired drones. Iran has not yet fired any drones. There may have been some drones fired from the resistance in Iraq, a handful maybe, but Iran has not fired anything. But the Germans are trying to blame Iran, whereas the Israelis have killed Iranian civilians. When I woke up, I was awake when I when they started striking Tehran. But early in the morning, the footage began to come out on social media. Children lying dead on the streets, just like in Gaza and in Lebanon. Uh, they'd be thrown out of their buildings, their homes. Women massacred, neighbors of targets massacred, families of targets massacred. That's basically so. So one of the targets was very close to our home, and they've been targeting areas. They were targeting areas across Tehran. All of these are war crimes, but the West supports it, and which is not a surprise because they support the Holocaust in Gaza. But Iran is very much alone. Regional countries are not going to help. Turkey, its air bases, its U.S. bases in Turkey are being used to help Israel, both offensively and defensively. The same is true in Qatar and the Emirates and Kuwait and in Bahrain. So just like in when they were bombing Yemen, these radar installations, these air bases, these military bases were being used by the United States against Yemen from these countries. So these countries are no are assisting Israel. Erdogan is assisting Israel. They're all assisting Israel. Forget the rhetoric. They're all bound to the West. So it's not easy for Iran, but Iran's key assets are deep underground and they are untouched. And these new commanders are preparing themselves, and they say that they are going to hit the Israeli regime hard. And I'm confident that that's going to happen.
Larry, Professor Marandi mentioned the way that the European leaders were reacting to what has happened. Here is what Macron said, that France has repeatedly condemned Iran's ongoing nuclear program and has taken all appropriate diplomatic measures in response. In this context, France reaffirms Israel's right to defend itself and ensure its security. And when you look at the mainstream media, they're somehow picturing the situation as it was a preemptive attack on Iran.
Well,
Why they try to do that?
when I went through training at a secret CIA base back in January of 1986, the slogan on the base was admit nothing, deny everything, make counter accusations. If you look at what Macron's saying, if you look at what the Germans are saying, this is an organized intelligence information campaign to portray Iran as the demon, as the villain. When it's a damn lie is what it is. But the lies don't matter in the West, unfortunately. And now you've got Donald Trump caught openly lying. On the one hand, said, "Oh yeah, we want to do diplomacy," and then, "Yeah, I knew when this was going to happen. I know everything." He knew all about it because, as I said, before Professor Marandi came on, the United States was actively involved in planning this attack. This is the size and scope of this attack. I'm frankly sort of astounded by. But it also gets to the broader point of Israel can't sustain it, just as the United States could not sustain operations in the Red Sea against the Houthis. This is designed to try to win a quick propaganda victory. And I share Professor Morandi's view that significant Iranian assets are buried deeply underground, are quite secure, and will be employed against Israel. But this is not going to be a quick war. If I'm Russia counseling Iran, I would say, don't attack the United States, at least not yet. Don't make this a Iran-U.S. war. Keep this as Iran-Israel. And let the United States, if the United States decides to get involved, which I think it actually may at some point, but which will be ultimately, I think, to the severe detriment of the United States. At least it will be clear to members of the global South who the villain is in this. I find it hard to believe that Vladimir Putin is feeling better about his relationship with Donald Trump and the United States because enough, Trump lied, and it's not just this. The attack that took place on the Russian strategic bombers on June 1st. Again, Trump, oh, I didn't know anything about that. I think that's a lie, in my judgment. So the other thing that we're seeing here is Israel's, and Professor Marandi didn't hear my initial comment about, the Jewish decapitation strategy started with Jesus over 2,000 years ago, and how has that turned out? Didn't lead to the elimination of Christianity. The assassination of Nasrallah didn't lead to the elimination of Hezbollah. And now this assassination of senior Iranian officials in the West, they keep believing that if they just kill off some key people, the government will collapse, the mullahs will be thrown out into the streets, and a U.S.-backed democracy will rise up. That they really believe this, and I don't know if the Iranian officials understand that is a genuine, deep-seated belief in the West. But that is one of the dangerous factors that's driving this whole madness.
Yeah. Professor Marandi, as Larry said, it seems that in the West, they're assuming that this attack was some sort of regime change attack, and this go and hit the regime, that they're going to be dissolved, they're going to be gone. Your take on that?
Yes, there's no doubt that this is a so-called regime change operation, and the United States and the West has been attempting to overthrow Iran for well over 40 years. That when they supported Saddam Hussein in his invasion of Iran alongside the Soviet Union, that was the intention to undermine Iran, and they've been working against Iran ever since. And I think that now it's no different. And I agree with Larry. In the United States, they do believe that if they just, and they've been saying this for decades now, that if they just give a little push, that Iran will fall apart and everything will be fine, and Iran will become a democracy like Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Syria and all of these wonderful democratic countries, or like the United States, where they're now. We see what's going on there. So, of course, the objective is never democracy. They are deterring democracy across the board uh, when it doesn't serve their purposes. But in any case, they do that have that firm belief, and that's because they believe their own propaganda. They hire these Iran experts or these Iranians who go to the United States who know what needs to be said. They will say what needs to be said, and they will fund them, and then these people will fund the politicians and the people in power to come to give speeches and to participate in their programs, and then they get more funding, and they have this. This narrative is very, very deep and strong and entrenched in the United States, and it fits with the American exceptionalism notion that is that Iran obviously. The people of Iran don't want to be something different than us. They want to be like us. So all of these reinforce one another. But I think it's clear that the opposite is happening. People in Iran are outraged. They see the statements made by the French, the Germans, the West. They see that to the IAEA chief, he is unwilling to condemn the Israeli regime for striking Iran's nuclear program, and they see the dead children and the dead women the footage of them on the streets of Tehran and in their own neighborhoods or in neighborhoods nearby, and that is going to have the opposite effect. Now, as I said, this is the first day. It was a surprise attack. The Iranians were expecting an attack, but they didn't know exactly when and how and in what way. But so it still constitutes a surprise attack. It is a very dark day today. People are very upset, and the images coming out, of course, as I said, a lot of it is not necessarily true, but it doesn't. It's not a pretty picture at all. But Iranians are very angry, and they're not angry at the government because the government didn't do any wrong. The government didn't bomb anyone. The government didn't assassinate anyone. The government just supported the people of Palestine and is opposed to the genocide. And Iran being the only country alongside Yemen that has been actively opposing the genocide in Palestine, this is the price that it's paying. So, the Americans can wish all they want, and they'll continue to think this way, and they'll continue to say so because it serves their purpose. But I think that ultimately, uh, what we're going to see in the coming hours, I suppose, or I don't know exactly when, but in the days ahead, will be a heavy Iranian response. I think that Iran's striking the United States will probably depend on U.S. actions, and but if there is a conflict with the United States, which is quite possible with Trump in power, then I think it's very clear that the countries in the Persian Gulf will be swept away very swiftly. Remember, Iran has tens of thousands of missiles and probably tens of thousands of drones, if not more, that are long range and that are targeting Israel. Iran has hundreds of thousands of drones and missiles that can destroy everything in the Persian Gulf and on the other side of the Persian Gulf. And the Persian Gulf is very narrow, it's pretty narrow, and Iran controls one side of it. And it's full of oil and gas installations, tankers. If there's war in the Persian Gulf, that's the end of the global economy as we know it. That would be a catastrophe that it's difficult for me to contemplate what the world would look like under those circumstances. So we'll have to see where that. So we have to hope that Trump is sane enough not to to, to stay out of this. But he looks very much like he wants to be a part of it from his statement. But in any case, I'm expecting an Iranian strike. I don't know when, but this will take some time. This war.
Yeah. Larry, Donald Trump, what does he want to do? Do you think that he wants to escalate? Because as Israel was attacking Iran, he said that it's right now is the best time to negotiate, to talk with Iran, because he feels that Iran would be in a weaker position to talk with. That's why he arguing that that was the main strategy in my opinion. They wanted to put Iran in a weaker position, but that doesn't change the mindset of Iranian. He knows that Iranians know what would be the red line. You're taking that.
Well, the Iranian government has not chosen to consult with me and ask my opinion. Um, if um, if there are any Iranian officials making the case that the talks with the United States should continue, I think those officials should be immediately removed from office. There is no negotiation with the United States. Negotiations rest on a premise that if I tell you something, or I put my name on a piece of paper, or I sign a commitment on a piece of paper, that I'm going to do what I claim I'm going to do. And I'm trusting you that you're going to honor that agreement and do the same. The United States has not abided by, held up any agreement. JCPOA, Donald Trump used it like toilet paper, threw it away. And, the French and the Brits, did they honor that agreement? Absolutely not. And, again, it's not to be too critical of the Russians and the Chinese, but, they got played for fools. They literally thought, oh, we can sign on to this. We'll play with the West. We'll go along with this international rules-based order. We'll all get along. Sorry, it's bullshit. It's a lie. This is all about Europe and the United States wanting to take over and control Iran. It goes back to when they overthrew Mossadegh in 1953. They want control of the oil, the resources. They don't give a damn about the Iranian people. They can all fucking die for all the West cares. It's the resources, it's the money, it's the oil. And it's sorry to be so cynical and angry about this, but this has been going on for too long. It's got to stop. And the countries that are capable of stopping it aren't doing anything to do it. I think Russia up to this point, it's still being played for a fool. Now they do understand that they're fighting NATO, and they're trying to be cautious to keep from escalating this. But the West is showing no such compunction at all, pulling out all stops. And this particular attack on Iran, it was prepped this previous week with the release of that, I'll call it, the fabricated IAEA report claiming Iran was in violation. It was all this was to lay a public predicate to justify military action, in the same way that that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. We got to stop him. This is just another iteration of that strategy.
Professor Marandi, Larry mentioned the way that Iran sees the talks. How do you feel about that?
He's absolutely correct. The Europeans, they pretend as if Iran is violating international law. Iran is well within its rights within the regulations and rules of the International Atomic Energy Agency. With regards to the nuclear deal that we had with the P5+1, the Iranians were abiding by their commitments completely, yet the United States was violating the deal. The Europeans were violating the deal. Then the United States under Trump tore up the deal, and the Europeans disregarded all of their commitments completely. So even after that, when the Europeans and the Americans completely put aside their commitments, the Iranians were abiding by the deal for a full year afterwards. And then during the second year, they gradually decreased their commitments. So who is to blame? Western journalists who've been following these issues know this. But those journalists who I know, who I've met, who I've discussed the nuclear program in detail, they lie in the media, in the Western media. They repeat what the talking points that their government wants them to repeat. So what you'll be hearing in the Western media is that the Israeli regime is carrying out targets on Iran's nuclear program, that they are accusing Iran of making nuclear weapons. They won't tell you that they've been saying this that Netanyahu has been saying this for 30 years now, that Iran is on the verge of making nuclear weapons. They won't tell you that International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors are in those nuclear facilities. They go to those nuclear facilities regularly to inspect.
Actually, Professor, let me correct you on one point. 41 years. Netanyahu made the first claim in 1984 that Iran's just a year or two from getting a nuke. 41 years. You were just a child back then.
Yeah, exactly. So it goes back even further than I thought. This is the utter hypocrisy. So they justify murder, they justify death and destruction through misinformation and disinformation, and through sheer lies. But again, this is not new. We've been witnessing this in Gaza for over 20 months. Remember when the Israelis first began bombing hospitals and the West tried to say that it was Hamas or the resistance that did it by mistake or on purpose? And then they kept bombing more and more hospitals, and they started killing kids in their incubators. And then the West just moved on. The Western media. Only recently, in the last few weeks, have there been criticisms of Israel, and now you're seeing the Western media trying to distract attention away from that and suddenly make Iran the bogeyman in order to justify and legitimize the actions of this barbaric monster and his monstrous allies in government and the opposition in Israel, because overwhelmingly the Israeli population support genocide.
Larry, who was the guy the main planner of what has happened in Iran? It was Israel that Donald Trump decided to get along with them, or it was Donald Trump to make a better position for him to negotiate with Iran?
No, no. I guess I sort of reject the premise of your question that uh, Trump's Trump's got zero interest in negotiating a legitimate deal with Iran. Zero. It's just, it's a lie. It's a negotiating tactic on his part because the true objective, uh, destroy the current leadership, do a regime change in Iran, get a government in place in Iran that's going to be compliant, that will be a good vassal of the United States, that will do what the United States wants it to do, and will be a way to help block and weaken Russia. That's the longer term strategy here, because this is about defeating Russia and China ultimately. Iran again is just another, uh, let's call it's not a mere pawn. Uh, let's put it as a knight on the chessboard, but nonetheless, it's not the king or queen of this move. And the issue to negotiate again, if this was simply about getting a deal to make sure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, the deal is very easy to have. Russia was willing to certify, China's willing to certify, and Iran was willing to let inspectors come in and say, hey, we're not building a nuke. And on top of what has been the position of the Ayatollah Khamenei going back, 22 years? So the deal was there to be had. They didn't want the deal. This is all about regime change. The nuclear weapon thing is, in fact, it's just an excuse. This is a replay of the Saddam Hussein strategy. That let's accuse them of doing something that they're not doing so that we can go in and justify ourselves for taking over and destroying the country. That's what's going on, Nima.
Professor Marandi, many people were arguing, let's find some sort of political solution with the United States and in Iran and outside Iran. Do you think that these people right now with the attacks are convinced that the United States doesn't have any sort of will, any sort of commitment to make some sort of deal with Iran?
Oh, I think he temporarily froze there, Nima.
It seems that
He's there. He's back.
Can you hear me, Professor Marandi?
He moved slightly, and then
Yeah. It seems that there is a problem with the connection. Can you hear me, Professor Marandi? Yeah. Larry, let's go ahead with you. And since Professor Marandi is not, it seems that the connection has some sort of problem.
yeah, he can jump back in and interrupt me at any point.
Yeah.
Rather hear
Go
what he has.
ahead with the question. Those people who were arguing that there is a solution with the United States, we can negotiate with the United States. We can find many people in Iran with the current president of Iran, the current government of Iran, they were in favor of negotiating with the United States.
Yeah.
How do you find their position right now?
I think it's been destroyed. It's been, if they're standing by that now, they're fools. And look, I understand why they took that position initially. They were, they really wanted to believe that that the United States could be their friend. That the United States was willing to accept Iran as a legitimate negotiating partner. And I guess they really didn't appreciate the degree to which the United States is a hostage to the Zionist movement. Here he's back.
Yeah.
Those who in Iran who were pressing for negotiations I think I'd be shocked if any of them now still believe that that's a viable path forward. Maybe Professor Marandi can weigh in on that.
Go ahead, Professor
I
Mohammed.
agree. Yeah, I've always been a critic of the nuclear deal, and although I'm not hostile towards the negotiators, but I always thought from 2015, I was with them in Vienna, and I said to them, Dr. Zarif personally, that I don't think the United States is going to abide by its commitments. And I think I was proven correct. But now I think it's much more, it's impossible really to do a deal with the United States under Trump. Trump is constantly changing his position. He even after deals are signed, as in like in the ceasefire for Gaza, he changes his position and undermines the deal. He could ultimately he shifts his position with regards to the negotiations with Iran, and the West will follow him wherever he goes, and so will a number of other countries across the world that are weak and need or want some concession from the West or some sort of aid from the West. So he'll get his little coalition to always support him. But but even if there is a deal signed, he could undermine it the next day and nothing will happen. He can post something on Truth Social and say, "No, I don't want this deal. It's the Iranians are cheating, or the Iranians are doing this, or they're doing that," and he'll just undermine it. And the Germans and the French and the British and the Europeans, they'll all say, "Yes, that's exactly true," and the Iranians are evil, and Israel has the right to defend itself to the last Palestinian and to the last Amalek and to the last Iranian and to the last Arab. That's the position that they'll take. The elites, that's what they'll do. And so for Iran, it's impossible under these circumstances to negotiate. And then, of course, there's the issue of sovereignty. What Trump is demanding of Iran is a violation of Iranian sovereignty. It's like taking a piece of territory from Iran. It's just not going to happen. So we are in a dead end right now. I don't think there's any uh, hope for negotiations, and the only way forward is for the Americans and the Israelis to face a situation like in Yemen, where they fail. But I think people will die, and I think a lot of harm will be done. And war is something that is almost impossible to contain. This could spiral out of control, and if it does, then all the oil and gas assets in the region, they could disappear. They could be destroyed. And that would, as I said earlier, that would be the end of the global economy. So the Israelis, Netanyahu, his people, they are willing to sacrifice the United States, the world, the global economy for their own selfish interests. But what Trump is doing, this immorality aside, the immorality of the Europeans and the West aside, and the fact that they're supporting crimes against humanity and war and genocide, but all that aside, they are putting the world economy at grave risk. And it is quite plausible, in my opinion, to see such a situation where there's no more oil and energy from the Persian Gulf region. And have no doubt, if that happens, these family dictatorships will be gone in days, if not hours. And it will be a catastrophe across the globe. But Iran is put in, but at the same time,
Yeah, it seems that the connection, the
the
problem
fact
is
that
with.
the West wants,
He's back. He's back.
this is all about the West wanting to support Netanyahu, a genocidal maniac, and demonizing Iran because it is supporting the Palestinian people. It is extraordinary.
Larry, to what extent the Trump administration is able to defend Israel? We have some sort of idea, some sort of understanding what would be the reaction, the attack on the part of Iranians. Do you feel that the Trump administration would do something beyond what the Biden administration was capable of doing in those days, or they're gonna do the same because that wasn't sufficient to somehow intercept the missiles coming from Iran, the drones coming from Iran, how capable is the United States today to defend Israel if Iran decides to go hard on Israel?
Well, the United States and Israel are capable of shooting down drones if that's the first wave of an Iranian attack, because they're not traveling at hypersonic speeds. Um, they, travel at a much slower speed. But you then get to an issue of uh, basically how much ammunition do you have? Can Iran fire enough drones that they will end up draining the supply of anti-aircraft or air defense ammunition that's being fired at the drones? Then, when you introduce the hypersonic missiles, and what we saw, the true promise one by Iran was initially just a demonstration to say, hey, we can attack you. We can use a combination of drones and missiles to attack you, hoping that that would have dissuaded Israel from its aggressive posture towards um, uh, Iran, but it didn't, which then led to the True Promise 2 attack. I believe it was like the 1st of October last year. Um, and again, um, that was more forceful. It was actually, it was again a demonstration saying, okay, we can evade your missile defense system and hit targets, but they didn't do it in such a way as to really cause significant casualties on the side of Israel. I think recognizing that they had, then it would have escalated this into war. But again, trying to send Israel a message. Well, Israel didn't get the message, or Iran was very naive in believing that it could, by doing this, it would say, okay, you got to take us seriously. They don't take Iran seriously. Um, and I think, as Professor Marandi was pointing out in his initial comments once he came on air, the that there is a lot of artificial intelligence generated disinformation being put out to portray Israel's attacks on Iran as being far more devastating than they actually have been. Just remember what we saw out of Ukraine in the early hours after the attacks on June 1st at the strategic air bases. Reportedly 5 air bases. Later turned out only 2. They claimed 41 aircraft destroyed. They showed you videos of it, planes burning. Again, artificially generated. Wasn't true. Um, I think the total number of planes, I've heard between 3 to 5, 3 to 7, and not all of those were modern active aircraft. A lot of them were mothballed or were there being used for parts. So I think part of what we're seeing now with a lot of the information being put out on Telegram and other social media platforms is portraying this as a devastating attack, and that there's no way Iran can respond to it. And I think part of that is designed as well to try to discourage the Iranian people from being willing to retaliate. Now, I don't think it's going to work. And in fact, it may have just the opposite effect. It will redouble Iran's desire to fight back. So this is, we're less than 24 hours since this thing started. And, I made the comment earlier that the Japanese on December 8th, man, they were celebrating. They had a great victory in Pearl Harbor. How did that turn out? It turned out very badly for the Japanese. So, like I said, an early Pyrrhic victory does not translate into a strategic victory. And I think that from a standpoint of logistics, manpower, that Israel and political isolation, that apart from some of the support that it's getting from Europe, apart from the support that it's still getting from the United States, um, that its standing around the world has eroded dramatically, and this is only going to accelerate that. And we're going to, um, you know, the it's also, I guess, sort of exposing the United Nations as a completely inept, feckless, useless institution. Because despite condemnation and criticism, no action of any consequence will be taken towards Israel, just as they've been allowed to carry out genocide with no consequences.
And what's different when I compare Israel to Iran, Larry? What comes to my mind? And in a war of attrition, if something goes to that direction, a war of attrition between Iran and Israel, Israel cannot sustain it. Iran produces everything they have, this, despite air defense system that they're getting from Russia, but they have their own air defense systems in Iran. They
Yeah,
build everything. It's Israel that is receiving 90%, more than 90% from the United States, and they're
yeah,
not
yeah.
capable of producing ammunition in Israel the way that Iran is capable of. How is that going to be seen with the administration in the United States?
Well, no, I mean, Trump is he's wedded to Israel. The Zionists control the U.S. government. You know, anybody who dares speak out against the Zionist genocidal policies is labeled an anti-Semite, and in some cases arrested. If you're not an American citizen, you're expelled. But even American citizens are facing, possible, prosecution for hate crime, simply for speaking out and describing what Israel is doing as accurately as a form of genocide. So uh, Israel right now, Israel doesn't have to worry about political support, at least in the short term. But the middle to long term is problematic because a growing number of people under the age of 50, they don't share this nonsensical view about Zionism and that Jesus is coming back and we got to preserve Israel at any cost. They're not buying that, and they're recognizing that Israel is behaving in an inhuman manner and treating the Palestinian people as just human garbage. And at some point, Israel's going to find itself dramatically isolated. However, that's not on the immediate horizon, I don't think. So it's just we're stumbling into war. There's no other way to put it. We're walking. We don't have a blindfold on. We see exactly what's happening, and we're walking into war.
And 2 days ago, there was an article in Haaretz saying that the Israeli government is collapsing. That's why Netanyahu is playing with the game of attacking on Iran. It seems
Hmm.
that Netanyahu he's getting everything he wants with the case of Iran. He wants the continuation of the conflict with Iran, to go against Iran, maybe bring in the United States. And how is the United States, while having the situation in Ukraine, we know that ammunition, we know the problem with ammunition going to Ukraine. We talk about it a lot. How is that going to work with the United States if it turns to be a war between Iran and Israel?
Okay, I'm not sure.
If it
Repeat.
if this conflict turns into a war, a direct war between Iran and Israel, in the case of ammunition, how capable is the United States to provide Israel with the ammunition that they need to fight Iran?
Well, it's already. It may not be a formally declared war. It's already a war. So let's not talk about it something that could happen. That's happening. That's all. This is a war. By any definition, Israel's attacks on Iran, while this is no different than Hitler saying, "Oh, my border posts were attacked by the Poles. We got to invade Poland for self-defense." That's all this is. This is a pretext, and it's been pretty sophisticated pretext put together, but a pretext nonetheless. Um, And there's always that initial euphoria of victory. We've seen it over and over and over. When uh, going back to the U.S. Civil War, the first is all the Union forces were headed to the Battle of Manassas, the first Bull Run. People were going out. Members of Congress were riding out into the Virginia farmland in buggies to have picnics and celebrate. They had bottles of wine. They were going to drink. Big party. You know, 1914, the war to end all wars, World War I. It's gonna be over quick. We're gonna put those Huns in their place. World War II, same thing. Korean War, Vietnam War. We go after these wars, and George W. Bush, hey, we're in Iraq, mission accomplished. And it was only after that that the violence really started escalating, and the fight continued. And you know, I challenge anybody to argue that the United States has made Iraq a stronger, safer place to be right now. Are you kidding? Just the opposite. One that's a loyal ally of the United States? Absolutely not. So, I guess my broader point is that these kinds of conflicts spin out of control. While people like Donald Trump and Netanyahu and maybe even Pezeshkian and Putin may think that they can control. They can't contain or control this at all. The genie is out of the bottle now, and Iran is whether Iran formally declares war, it's a war, and they're going to retaliate. And then in response to their retaliation, Israel's going to retaliate. And then in response to that, Iran's going to retaliate some more. They're going to be fighting. And I think Professor Marandi is correct. At some point, this is going to involve the Gulf Arabs. They're going to have to make a choice. They're going to either be with Iran or they're not. And if they're going to side with the United States, they're going to wind up getting destroyed.
Larry, we know that Iranian officials, before this attack happening, they said if they will get attacked by Israel or the United States, we're going to build a nuclear bomb. We're going to go after nuclear weapons. Do you think that with what has happened so far, is that pushing the mindset of these officials in Iran to go after nuclear weapons because they see that the United States is not honest in the way that they're behaving? They wanted to put everything on the table to negotiate with the United States, but that doesn't seem to be sufficient for the Trump administration.
Yeah, well, it certainly strengthened the case for those making that argument. But I can't discount Russia's influence in this process, at least potentially. Russia's pretty adamant about the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. And this is there'll be some interesting negotiations now between Iran and Russia. Russia needs that north-south transport corridor in order to be able to help protect itself against the West. And I don't think it's in a position where it's just going to walk away or it's going to dictate to Iran, you're going to do this or else. And Iran is going to ask for some assurances saying, hey, we've got this security arrangement with you, but what good is it if, we're getting attacked and you're doing nothing to help? You're doing nothing to stop this? You're allowing this to go on? Russia still has some influence with Israel, albeit limited, but nonetheless some significant influence. And I think the biggest fear is that if Iran's retaliatory strikes are as potentially significant as I think that they can be, Israel is going to face enormous pressure to use a nuclear device in its next strikes against Iran. And if they decide to go nuclear, then at that point, it's going to put Russia in a position of maybe having to intervene. And intervening in a very strong way with the United States. So you've got to stop this. This cannot be allowed. If this goes on, then you're signaling that it's okay to start using nukes. Now, I said this can get out of hand on so many different ways. and it is it's terrifying to think about those possibilities.
Larry, has Donald Trump destroyed everything, every aspect that we expected from him before coming to power? He was talking so differently than what he's talking about
Yeah,
today.
yeah. No, he, look. I sadly I admit I voted for him over Kamala Harris, and if I could go back and make a decision, I wouldn't vote for either of them. But Donald Trump has betrayed the promises he made to be a president of peace. He is now he's aiding and abetting war in Ukraine and war in Israel and Iran, and he's allowing it to go on. He could have pulled the plug on all of this. He could have brought them all to a halt. He had that kind of power. Then he's refused to exercise it. And then, you know, his good God, his comments over the last 24 hours are just crazy. Because, you know, in theory, you want, you know, he needs to recognize the Chinese and Russians are listening. They're paying attention. Now they're watching on the one hand. Oh yeah, we had no idea. Oh, we tried to stop. Oh yeah, we put the word. We told Israel to stop. And then today, yeah, I knew it when they were going to hit. I knew all about it. I know everything. Okay, which is it? You're a dumbass kept in the dark, or you know everything. He's not a dumbass kept in the dark. He knows, and is playing a very, very dangerous game. And I think Trump has destroyed his credibility with Putin and with Xi in the last 24 hours. I don't see how Putin and Xi could trust anything that Trump says going forward. You know, given his you know, provable lies regarding attacks on Iran, and then you know, initially I thought maybe some of this was saber rattling in order just to be a negotiating ploy to get Iran to the table. No, it's clear U.S. was actively involved with the military plans. In fact, they leaked that information that General Kurilla, the head of CENTCOM, has been, you know, working closely with the Israelis on planning. So, you know, I think Trump has credibility is the most important resource a president can have. You know that their word, that they mean what they say, and you've got to take what they say seriously. With Trump, you got to always assume the worst. You can't take anything he says seriously, other than assuming that ultimately he's going to use violence and lie about what's going on. Yeah, I'm sorry to say that, but you know that you know, it's not me. I'm not the one that said I know everything. I knew when this was going to happen. Well, if you knew when it was going to happen, why didn't you stop? Stop it. Why didn't you tell Netanyahu, no, you can't do this? And in fact, we're going to alert Iran that you're getting ready to attack. And we're going to tell Iran where you're going to attack. We're going to give Iran every bit of information we have so that Iran can stop you. This cannot go forward. He didn't do that. Sat back and facilitated it. You know, we still don't have a good clue of what U.S. military assets were involved, intelligence assets. But I think, you know, one of these days we're going to find out that there's a significant U.S. role.
I think there is no a teeny tiny doubt in the mind of Vladimir Putin when Donald Trump said to him he didn't know about the attack on Russia. Right now he says that 100% he knew that.
Yeah,
With
yeah,
the case of Iran, with what has happened, he's just going online and lying about everything, and then coming back and just exposing your lies, not just trying to cover them. It's somehow unbelievable on the part of the president of the United States.
yeah, yeah. You know, so this, you know, as I said, Trump has he's been very careless with his credibility, and he's going to pay a very severe price for that.
Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure as
Uh,
always.
well, yeah, we're gonna. I think we'll have a lot to talk about come Monday.
Yeah,
This,
exactly.
this is not going to uh, get better in terms of securing peace for the world. It's going to be, uh, I think, very very devastating.
Yeah, exactly. See you soon, Larry.
All right, my friend. Bye bye.
Bye bye.